Another month, another GT7 update, and another month of disappointment. But I want to really get into why. I'm going to be very brief on the intro to this video. There's a new update for GT7 coming out, and about 60% of the cars in it don't even belong in the game. Let's start with the good. We've got the new Miata version, the Spirit Racing Miata, and that makes sense. Sadly, we just lost one of the Miata's designers, so it makes sense they're going to add this, plus the Spirit Racing collaboration with GT. And then you've got the new Hyundai Elantra N, which is just a popular performance car right now. Hyundai has been producing some really good performance cars for the dollar in the last few years. Now, we get into the problems. The next 3 cars, 3 out of 5 cars in this update, 60%, don't belong in GT7. You have another VGT and 2 SUVs. None of this we need, and we already have plenty of it. But I'm actually going to break down the math on just how bad Granturismo 7's car list is and has gotten over time with updates. There's 3 major offenders when it comes to the car list being really bad, and that's 3 different groups of vehicles that I want to talk about. The first is a group of vehicles that I'm going to call useless utility vehicles, which consist of crossover SUVs, slow off-roaders like the Unimog and the Willys Jeep, and some of the vans and stuff that they've added that just have no place whatsoever in the game. The second category that I'm going to talk about is the made-for-game race cars, the GR4 and GR3, etc. cars, the GRB cars, that are all just filler content from GT Sport. And the last category of vehicles I'm going to talk about is the obvious VGTs. I think those are a pretty big point of contention amongst the community, but I'm going to point out the math on each of these groups of cars and how much of the car list they suck up versus what we're missing from this game. The first group of vehicles I'm going to discuss here is what I like to call the useless utility vehicles. Vehicles like crossovers and slow off-roaders like the Jeep and the incoming FJ40 and the vans that we have and the ambulance in the game. And here's the thing, I don't personally dislike any of these vehicles. I dislike most of the crossovers because they're crossovers. But in terms of like the off-roaders and like the Willys Jeeps, I've worked on several old-school Willys Jeeps. I've had the opportunity, they're really cool. But they don't belong in GT. For example, these slow off-roaders, all of GT's off-road tracks are built for high-speed rally cars. They're built for going fast. They are not built to crawl and go slow, which is what things like the FJ and the Jeep and the Unimog are built for. They're built for slow overlanding and going through streams and through mud holes, not fast-paced rallycross tracks. The crossovers obviously don't belong just because they don't belong. I don't think that requires any explanation. And the vans, they're interesting, but there needs to be other vehicles in game before we focus on adding utility vans, especially utility vans that have a pretty limited market in Japan. Now I'm going to expand on this after I discuss all these types of vehicles. I did make some exceptions for this group of vehicles, such as the Ioniq or the Raptor. The Ioniq is fast. I've raced against the Ioniq at autocross before. They are quick. You can drive that on track. That belongs in the game. It's a quick track car. It may be SUV shaped. They do not screw around. The Raptor, it works with the high-speed rallycross courses. I'm fine with it. The same can be said for the Tundra. I made an exception for the Urus. I did not count these vehicles. In total, there's 17 vehicles out of GT's 548 cars that I would dub useless utility vehicles, which is around 3% of GT's total car list being vehicles that just don't belong or we don't need. But that's the smallest category of vehicles I'm going to discuss. The next one is the made-for-game race cars. Now, the made-for-game race cars, these are the custom-made by PD GR4, GR3, GRB, and so on cars that don't exist in real life in those classes, or in the classes GR4 and 3 are meant to mimic. They are cars that are made for game based off existing cars, essentially. These were designed as filler cars for GT Sport because GT Sport's car list is so small, or at least it was at launch, and that's why the fictional GR cars, they were never expanded on really in updates. Over the years and years of updates between GT Sport and GT7, very few fictional or made-for-game, whatever you want to call them, GR cars have been added in. It's almost always been licensed cars. There's been a handful, I think less than 10, over the, 7 years of updates these games have had combined. These cars take up a much larger chunk of the car list, with 45 of these in-game, comprising a little over 8% of GT7's car list out of 548 cars. There's nothing wrong with these cars, but this is a problem because they take up so much space on that list. But now we move on to the biggest group of offenders in this, which is VGT cars. Now, VGT cars are a huge point of contention in the GT fan base, and they take up a lot of space. There are numerous brands in-game that are dedicated to nothing but VGT cars in-game when they could have road cars. There are, out of GT's 548 cars, as of this update that's coming, there are 58 VGTs in GT7, making up 10.5% of GT7's car list. 10.5% dedicated to fictional vehicles, most of which only exist as part of a marketing program. Only a handful of VGTs have been built in real life, and only a handful of those even function or roll around on their own and aren't just static models. All in total, you put all of these numbers together, 120 cars in GT7, or just a hair shy of 22% of the game's entire car list, is these three groups of cars. It's either crossovers and slow off-roaders and vans, fake concept cars, or fake race cars, in a game series that is dedicated to exploring the wide world of road cars, with oddball cars and race cars as kind of an aside or an interesting kind of side to things. 22% nearly of the car list is dedicated to actual shit. Actual cars that people usually have either no interest in driving or are just there as filler to bump up a game from nearly 10 years ago's car list. And that makes up nearly 22%, nearly a quarter of the game's car list. Now, I know what people are going to say. They're going to say, but Driven, there's always been concept cars and oddball cars and fictional race cars in GT games, and you're completely correct. They've always been there. The LM cars, the racing modification cars, all of the concept cars, the German, Schwimmwagen or whatever it was called in GT5, the vehicles like that have been there for most of the series. But the difference is they've never been here in this large of amounts, and they've always had some sort of use in game, either as a one-off event or as an interesting prize for a high-end event. The GT7 has the highest amount of these types of vehicles of any game in the series in terms of sheer numbers and by percentage. It's untouchable. No game had nearly this many just vehicles that are pretty much useless. But not only that, we're missing out on tons and tons of basic and important cars to regular car culture that just aren't in the game. See, here's the thing. You might look at that 22% and say, well, that's still 78% of regular cars. What are you complaining about? You've still got 78% of the game is regular cars. Well, besides the fact that there's issues like there's a lot of duplicates or different trim levels of other cars in GT7, which isn't so much as an issue, just a preference, there's a ton of important basic cars that are missing from GT7. And the thing is that when you think about GT, what is GT's main draw in terms of cars? What has GT's main draw always been? Every mainline numbered GT, the point of the game, one of the main draws to the game, was that the bulk of vehicles you will experience are vehicles that you could probably realistically experience in real life. It's something people have always thrown out there. People have always whined that other games are supercar simulators and that they just want to drive regular cars. And generally speaking, GT was always good at that. They were always good at giving you a nice mix of low-end performance vehicles like Miatas and Civics and little hatchbacks, all the way up to mid-range vehicles, higher-end things like German sports cars, but things you could afford, BMWs, Audis, things of that nature. They've always had that kind of expansive list of obtainable dream cars, some people call them, but just cars that the average Joe could probably go to a dealership and buy tomorrow. But GT7 is lacking so many of those vehicles, and here's where the second part of the math comes in. So let's start with the Japanese cars, right? GT has always been famous for its selection of Japanese cars. So really, it should have everything you'd ever want, right? It should have all the basics. Well, no. Let's see some of the math on that. From the year 1960 until the start of the 90s, Japan is only represented with less than 10 cars per decade. In fact, most of those are in the 80s with 9. The 70s only have 4 cars, and the 60s only have 5 cars, and in each of those decades, some of those are race cars, which means they're not even road cars that you could attain. It gets worse. There's no Del Sol. There's no Honda Del Sol. There's no CRX. There's no Civic that's not a hatchback. Did you want some old school rotary cars? Well, there's no FB, there's no RX-3, there's no Cosmos. Did you want some of the old drift platforms from back in the day that people love? Well, there's no Saphiros or Chasers either. Did you want anything from Japan that isn't a Skyline, an S-Chassis, or one of the big Halo cars? You're not getting it. It's the list of Japanese cars in GT is almost entirely focused on what's popular. And that's really a huge change from previous games. But let's move on to something else, shall we? The entirety of the United Kingdom's auto production from 1960 until the year 2000 is represented with less than 20 cars, with a ton of those being either race cars or very high dollar supercars. There are almost no attainable vehicles in that list. There are almost no American cars from the 80s until the 2010s. There's only one car from the 80s from the US. There's only a handful from the 2000s. And I believe there's none from the 90s, which is insane. There are so many vehicles to pick from. There are no street pickups, no Lightning, no Cyclone or Typhoon, nothing like that. Not even ones from overseas like the Forester STI they made that was super popular, a crossover I would actually accept. There's tons and tons of missing vehicles. Where's the German performance wagons from the last 30 years? Where are the Cadillac V cars? Where are the cars from Sweden? There's only 2 of them in game. You're even missing basics like the NB and NC Miata. There's no Mustangs between the first gen and the S550. There's no Camaros between the first gen and the mid-2010s. It's absolutely ridiculous how many vehicles are missing. How many basic, staple, you can go out and buy this as a regular everyday person, cars that are missing from this game that are huge parts of car culture. And they're just completely missing because PD is too busy jamming the game with fucking VGTs and fake race cars and stupid fucking crossovers. It's absolutely ridiculous how much is being missed out on. Don't even get me started on how so many of the vehicles that are in-game, like all the vintage race cars and all that, yeah, they're cool, but they have almost no events, and some of them don't even have anything to enter properly, unless you want to race a 60s race car against GT3 cars. Because apparently, they can't even add in those events from previous games, but that's an entirely different video topic. It's absolutely ridiculous to me that such a huge chunk, 22%, nearly a quarter of the car list, is dedicated to bullshit when there's so much missing from this fucking game in terms of cars. There's a lot missing from this fucking game in terms of game. But this video topic is about these car list issues, and it just blows my mind that no one ever breaks this down and talks about this. Now, I've seen people say, you know, oh, well, it's licensing, it's this and that. They can't have this in game. Licensing is a ridiculous argument. PD is under Sony. Sony has a fucking infinite money glitch worth of a wallet to blow. If they can finance Concorde, they can license a fucking Catfish Camaro. This isn't fucking rocket science. They spend an incredible amount of money, especially with GT. They made a movie. They do brand deals constantly with Dunlop and Brembo and Michelin with some bullshit claiming that Dunlop's using them for fucking tire production, which is just off the wall wild when GT doesn't even have basic tire physics, but that's again another video topic. It's insane to me that people will defend this and then claim this is how GT always was, and it's just about licensing it. GT was always full of this. GT was never full of this. GT games, when people say shitboxes in GT games, they're almost universally referring to basic sedans and hatchbacks and coupes that just aren't super powerful sports cars. There was not a ton of crossovers and slow rock crawlers and shit in previous GT games. This is entirely new to GT7. There was a handful of those vehicles in previous titles. Far less, and they always had an event. So the people defending this with licensing, or, oh, this is how GT always was, this is how it's always going to be, it's ridiculous to me. It was never like this. Now, if you want to disagree with me on parts of this, go ahead, especially my SUV part. I understand a lot of that's going to be opinion. I tried to make it as cut and dry as possible, and if you want to disagree with that and throw that out the window, go ahead. But the point is this. Before GT is getting piles of crossovers and Unimogs with hay bales on the back and VGT cars made by watch companies, we should be getting the basics of the car culture that the game is supposed to be about. If you're going to be a game that's going to claim to be about car culture, you should probably include a large number of vehicles that people actually access. Yes, brand new cars and supercars and the classic Halo cars are super cool and iconic, but the vast majority of people aren't buying those. There's a ton of R34s in the game. None of them are the affordable rear-wheel drive ones that people can actually buy. They're all the expensive GTRs and Nismos. I think a Nismo recently went for over $1 million at auction. Yes, I get it. They're the cars that are iconic, but doing that and then adding in a handful of cars that people can afford and a handful of regular new cars doesn't make much sense when you're missing so much. I shouldn't be having to choose between a car made by a watch company, a $1 million 90s import, and a supercar as my car list in a GT game, or a 60s Fiat 500 that can't get out of its own way. I shouldn't be having to choose between these things. You should have the basics of accessible car culture laid out if you're going to claim to be a car culture game. I should be able to buy an FB RX-7. There should be an SN95 in the game. There should be a Del Sol. There should be the 2000s Mazda speed car. There should be an NB Miata. There should be basic non-M BMWs from the 90s and 2000s, which are prolific throughout any sort of basic racing and drifting and autocross and anything you do. Go to your local track day. Go to your local drift event. Go to your local autocross day. Go to your local drag racing stuff. I can guarantee you it's not going to be a bunch of $1 million Skylines, vans, and cars made by a watch company. It's going to be a bunch of basic shit people can access and lower-end performance cars, because that's what the bulk of car culture is. And that was what GT nailed so well with 1 through 6 that they've abandoned with 7. And the point is that for every car we get that's a Toyota RAV4 or, you know, the Bulgari watch car or the Sony Afeela concept thing that no one's going to buy, it could be an FBRX-7. It could be that Honda Civic Coupe that you went to high school with. It could be the New Edge Mustang GT that your dad had that you relate to. It could be any of those things, and it's not, and it should be. Now, again, if you want to take an issue with my opinions in this video, be my guest. At the end of the day, I'm here to make people aware of how bad the numbers behind this situation are. You can't argue with the numbers. There's no good reason that 20+% of a GT game should have its car list be this bullshit. Now, if you like this video, go ahead and sub to my channel. No one will probably fucking watch this, no one ever does, but I make this for, you know, to preserve this information. So, if you liked it, go ahead and sub to me. I'm probably going to make some more GT videos because I'm finally getting fed up with everything they're doing and not putting it down on paper, or in this case, video form. Have a good one. I'll see you in the next video.